The morning I found my name crossed off my own mailbox, I stood on my front path and said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say. Because I was looking at my nephew's handwriting, black marker, 2 thick lines through my name, his written over it, on the mailbox my husband had painted the summer before he died. I stood there in my cardigan in the early morning cold and I looked at it for a long time. I had given Caleb and his wife that spare bedroom because that is what I have always done. You hold the door open. You make the bed up clean. You say yes before someone has to ask twice. 31 years in that house. 6 years alone in it. The room was ready because I still believed, at 69 years old, that family would need me. They moved in on a Thursday in March. By Sunday, Priya had rearranged my spice cabinet. She didn't mention it. I told myself it didn't matter. That was my first mistake, deciding that small things didn't matter. Because here is what I know now, standing on the other side of 8 months, small things are never small. They are the beginning of something. And the woman who lets the first one pass without a word is the woman who will one day walk to her own mailbox and find that her name has been erased from her own front gate. I took a photograph that morning. Then I went inside, made my coffee, and sat down at my kitchen table, the stool they had left me, because Priya preferred my chair. And I thought, not anymore. The spare bedroom had been ready for years before Caleb ever called. I kept it clean the way you keep something clean when you are not quite ready to let go of the reason you prepared it. Fresh pillowcases. The window cracked in summer so the room wouldn't go stale. A small lamp on the nightstand because I always thought a dark room felt abandoned. My husband Douglas had used it as a study in the early years, and after he passed I had moved his books to the living room shelves, one box at a time, and made the bed up properly. That was 6 years ago. The room had been waiting ever since. Caleb called on a Wednesday evening in late February. His voice was warm in the way voices get when someone needs something and knows you are the kind of person who will say yes. He and Priya had taken jobs in the city, good opportunities, he said, the kind you don't turn down, but the rental market was brutal and they needed a few months to find their footing. Just a few months. He said it twice. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want you to understand who I was at that moment. I was 69 years old. I had lived in that house for 31 years, raised my routines inside its walls the way you raise something careful and quiet, and I had been alone in it for 6 years. Caleb was my brother's son. I had held him at his christening. I had driven 4 hours to attend his college graduation and stood in a parking lot in the August heat holding a balloon because I wanted him to see a familiar face in the crowd. When he called and asked, I felt something I can only describe as useful. I felt needed in a way I had not felt in a long time. They arrived on a Thursday in March with 2 cars loaded to the roof. I had made up the bedroom with the good linens. I had cleared half the bathroom cabinet and left a set of fresh towels on the rail. I had written down the Wi-Fi password on a note card and left it on the nightstand. I had thought of everything I could think of, because that is what I do. That is what I have always done. By Sunday, the spice cabinet was different. I noticed it when I reached for the paprika and found cumin. Everything had been moved, grouped by some system I didn't recognize, labels facing different directions, my small jar of dried thyme missing entirely and later found on the top shelf behind the baking powder. Priya didn't mention it. She was pleasant at dinner that evening, asked me about the neighborhood, complimented the chicken. I told myself it was a small thing. I told myself she was just settling in. That was the first decision I made that I would later wish I could take back. Not the yes on the phone, the silence at the spice cabinet. Because small things are not small. They are a language. And when you don't answer, you have already said something. The first month passed the way early arrangements do, with everyone on their best behavior, edges softened, small frictions smoothed over before they could catch. Caleb fixed a hinge on the back gate without being asked. Priya brought home flowers once and put them in a vase on the kitchen table. There were evenings when the three of us sat in the living room and it felt, briefly, like something that could work. But I began to notice things. The way Priya would redirect a conversation about the house, where to put a piece of furniture, whether the back porch light needed replacing, as though the decision were hers to make. The way Caleb would answer questions directed at me, not rudely, but smoothly, the way you answer for someone you have decided needs managing. Small redirections. Small erasures. Each one easy to explain away. Then came the parking spot. I have a single-car driveway and a small detached garage I stopped using after Douglas died because the door mechanism had always been his to manage and I never learned the particular trick of it. I had told Caleb he was welcome to use the driveway. I parked on the street in front of the house, which was fine, which I had done before. But one rainy Tuesday in April, I came home from my doctor's appointment to find Caleb's car in the driveway and Priya's car parked in my usual spot on the street, directly in front of my own gate, and no space left for me within a reasonable walk. I drove around the block twice in the rain before I found a spot 2 houses down. I did not say anything that evening. I told myself it was an oversight. It happened again the following Thursday. And the Thursday after that. I started to understand that what I had offered as a kindness, the room, the driveway, the cabinet space, the quiet accommodation of 2 people building their footing, had been received as something else entirely. Not as generosity. As availability. As a resource that had been located and was now being used. The understanding came fully in month 5. I had been waiting for a utility bill, my electric account, which I have managed myself for 31 years, and it hadn't arrived. I asked Caleb at breakfast, casually, whether he had seen anything in the mail addressed to me. He looked up from his phone with an expression I can only describe as untroubled. He said, "Oh, I handle all of that now." Not I saw it and set it aside. Not it might have come yesterday. I handle all of that now. I looked at him across my kitchen table. He had already looked back down at his phone. I excused myself, walked to my bedroom, and sat on the edge of my bed. The room was quiet. Outside the window I could hear a car on the street, a dog somewhere, the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning. I sat very still and I thought about the word handle. About what it assumed. About what it revealed. That was the moment I understood that what I had offered as kindness, they had accepted as ownership. I did not cry. I did not go back to the kitchen and say what I was thinking. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, and then I got up, went to the small desk in the corner, and took out a notebook. I wrote down the date. I wrote down what he had said, exactly as he had said it. I wrote down the parking spot incidents with their dates. I wrote down the spice cabinet. I wrote down every small thing I had told myself didn't matter. And then I kept writing. Because I had decided, quietly, in the way I decide things, that I was not going to let the record belong to anyone but me. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known sitting at that desk with my pen and my notebook, was that someone else had already been watching. Someone who understood exactly what was happening, and who had left me something in my own mailbox 3 days earlier that I hadn't yet thought to use. For the first few weeks after I started that notebook, I told myself I was simply keeping track. That was all. A record. Dates and words and small incidents, written in my own hand, in my own house, in the corner of my own bedroom. I told myself it was just for clarity. That I wasn't planning anything. That I was only making sure I didn't forget. I think I knew that wasn't entirely true. By month 6, the house felt different in a way I couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't lived it. It wasn't loud. There were no arguments, no slammed doors, no moments you could point to and say, "There, that was the thing." It was quieter than that. It was the kind of different you feel in your chest before you can name it. The way a room feels when someone has moved through it and left it almost exactly as it was, but not quite. You know something has shifted. You just can't always say what. Priya had started referring to the house as our place. I heard it first on a Thursday evening. She was on the phone in the hallway, her voice low, easy, the voice of someone completely comfortable, and she said, "Come by our place on Saturday, we'll figure it out then." I was in the kitchen. I heard it clearly. I stood at the counter and I did not move for a moment. Then I dried my hands on the dish towel, walked to my bedroom, and wrote it down. The date. The exact words. Our place. I didn't say anything to her about it. I had learned by then that saying things didn't change them. What changed things was something else entirely, and I was still figuring out what that was. The following week, I was coming back from my morning walk when I heard Caleb talking to the man who lives 2 houses down, a retired schoolteacher named Gerald, who has lived on this street almost as long as I have. I slowed my pace. I wasn't trying to listen. But I heard Caleb say it, easy and casual as a man describing the weather. "Oh, we're just looking after my aunt for a while, making sure she's doing all right." I kept walking. I nodded to Gerald when he caught my eye. I went inside. I stood in my kitchen, with the window I chose and the tiles I laid and the shelf I put up myself the year after my husband died because I needed something to do with my hands, and I thought about the word looking after. About what it implied. About the version of me that word required. A woman being managed. A woman who needed tending. A woman who was no longer quite in charge of her own days. I was 69 years old. I had raised no one's children but helped raise several. I had run a household on a single income for 6 years. I had never once in my life needed looking after. I opened my notebook and I wrote down what Caleb had said to Gerald. I wrote down the date and the time and the exact phrasing. And then I wrote, in the margin, a single word, witness. Because I had realized something. I had been thinking about the notebook as a private record. Something for me alone. But what I actually had, if I was careful, was a document. And documents have weight that private feelings do not. That same week, a package arrived addressed to me. I was expecting it, a book I had ordered, something I had been looking forward to for a while. I came downstairs on a Monday morning and it wasn't on the table inside the door where packages always went. I checked the porch. It was sitting there in the light rain, the brown paper soft and damp at one corner. 4 days. It had been on the porch for 4 days. When I asked Priya about it, she said she was sorry, she'd meant to bring it in, she'd just forgotten. She said it lightly, the way you apologize for something that doesn't really require an apology because you don't really think you've done anything wrong. She was already looking at her phone before she finished the sentence. I took the book upstairs. I dried the cover with a cloth. I sat on the edge of my bed and I held it in my lap and I thought about the word forgotten. About how many things had been forgotten in this house in the past several months. My chair. My parking spot. My mail. My name, increasingly, in conversations where I was referred to as she or her or Caleb's aunt, as though I were a category rather than a person. You can tell yourself for a long time that these things are small. That they don't add up to anything. That you are being too sensitive, too proud, too attached to things that don't matter. I had told myself all of those things. I had been very patient with myself about it. But there is a point where the accumulation becomes undeniable, and I had reached it. It was around this time that I remembered the business card. Martin Okafor had lived across the street for 11 years. We were not close friends, we were neighbor friends, the kind where you know someone's name and their dog's name and you wave from driveways and occasionally speak for a few minutes over the fence. I knew he was retired. I knew he had been some kind of attorney. I knew he was a quiet man who kept his garden well and minded his own business with what I had always taken for simple privacy. 3 days before Caleb had told me he handled all of that now, I had found something in my mail slot. Not in the mailbox at the street, in the slot in my front door, which means someone had walked up the path and pushed it through deliberately. A folded piece of paper wrapped around a business card. The card said Martin Okafor, Property and Tenancy Law, Retired. The handwritten note said, simply, if you ever need to talk about property rights, I'm home most mornings. I had read it. I had put it in the pocket of my cardigan. And then the mail conversation with Caleb had happened, and I had gone to my bedroom and started my notebook, and somehow the card had stayed in the pocket and I had not thought about it again. Not because I had dismissed it. I think because I wasn't ready yet. Because some part of me was still hoping I wouldn't need it. I went to the cardigan. It was hanging on the hook behind my bedroom door. I reached into the pocket and the card was still there. I held it in both hands and I stood at my bedroom window for a long time. The street outside was quiet. I could see Martin's house, the dark green door, the small front garden, the light on in the front room even though it was mid-morning. He was home. I thought about what it meant that he had noticed. That he had watched long enough to understand what was happening and had said nothing to me directly, not because he didn't care, but because he was waiting for me to be ready. There was something in that I found unexpectedly steadying. Someone outside the house had seen. Someone with the right kind of knowledge had seen, and had left me a door to walk through when I chose to. I put the card in my cardigan pocket again. I went downstairs, put on my coat, and walked across the street. Martin answered on the second knock. He looked at me, and then at the card I was holding, and he said, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." We sat at his kitchen table. It was a plain, clean room, nothing extra, nothing wasted. He poured the tea and he let me speak first. I told him what had happened, in order, the way I had written it in the notebook. I did not rush. I did not apologize for the length of it. He listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You own the property outright?" I said yes. Paid off 14 years ago. He nodded. He said, "And there was no written agreement about their stay? No lease, no formal arrangement?" I said no. It was family. I didn't think I needed one. He didn't say anything to that. He just nodded again, the way someone nods when they already knew the answer and are simply confirming it. Then he began to explain, quietly and clearly, what my rights were. What the process looked like. What the timeline required. What I would need to have in writing and what I already had. I listened to all of it. I asked 2 questions. The first was about the notebook, whether what I had written would be useful. He said yes. He said, "Keep writing." The second question was about the mailbox. I told him what I had found that morning, my name crossed out in black marker, Caleb's name written over it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you have a photograph?" I said not yet. He said, "Take one today." Before anything else. I looked at him across the table. I said, "All right. Tell me how to begin." He picked up his tea. He said, "You already have. You just didn't know it." I walked back across the street with the business card in my pocket and my hands steady at my sides. The morning was cold and bright, the kind of light that makes everything look very clear and very still. I stopped at the mailbox on my way back up the path. I looked at it, the dented brass latch, the faded house numbers, the black marker over my name. I took out my phone. I took the photograph. And then something shifted in me, not loudly, not with any particular feeling I could name in the moment. Just a settling. The way a door sounds when it finally closes all the way. I had been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, for the moment when I would stop simply recording what was happening and start deciding what came next. That morning, standing on my own front path with my phone in my hand and Martin's card in my pocket and 8 months of careful notes in a notebook upstairs, I understood that the waiting was over. What Caleb and Priya didn't know, what they couldn't have known, because they had never once looked at me carefully enough to see it, was that I had already begun. The photograph was still on my phone when I walked back inside. I set it on the kitchen counter, my kitchen counter, the one I had scrubbed every Sunday morning for 31 years, and I stood there looking at the image on the small screen. My name, crossed out. His name, written over it. Black marker, casual and permanent, the way you label something you already own. I had taken the photograph the way Martin told me to. Evidence first. Feelings later, if at all. But standing there in my own kitchen, in the cold bright quiet of that morning, something else came into focus. Not the mailbox. Everything before it. The spice cabinet on day 3. The parking spot on that rainy Tuesday. The utility bill Caleb had looked me in the eye about and said, "I handle all of that now," the package left on the porch for 4 days. Donna's visit, and Caleb introducing himself to her as though he were the one who lived here and I were the guest. The phone calls where Priya said our place in a voice that carried through walls without apology. I had written all of it down. Dates. Times. Exact words. The notebook was upstairs in the drawer of my nightstand, and it was nearly full. I had thought, when I started keeping it, that I was simply recording. Protecting myself. Gathering proof of something I couldn't yet name. Standing in my kitchen that morning, I understood what I had actually been doing. I had been building a case. There is a moment, I think most women who have been in a situation like mine will recognize it, when you realize that the choice in front of you is not between confrontation and peace. It is between 2 kinds of loss. If I did nothing, I would lose my home. Not the deed. Not the legal title. But the living of it, the dailiness of it, the right to sit in my own chair at my own table without feeling like a visitor in someone else's arrangement. That loss was already well underway. If I acted, I would lose Caleb. Not the Caleb who had called me 8 months ago with warmth in his voice asking for help. That Caleb had not existed for some time, or perhaps had never existed quite the way I remembered him. But the idea of him. The version of my nephew I had carried for 30 years, the boy at Thanksgiving, the young man at his mother's funeral, the voice on the phone at Christmas. That Caleb. I sat at the kitchen table. Not my chair, Priya had moved it again, and I had stopped moving it back. I sat on the stool she had left in its place. I thought about that for a long moment. Then I got up, moved the stool aside, and carried my chair back to where it belonged. It was a small thing. It took less than 30 seconds. But I want you to understand what it cost me to do it, and what it gave me back. I called Donna that afternoon. I had not told her about the notebook. I had not told her about Martin, or the business card, or the conversation across his kitchen table that morning. Donna had been the one who encouraged me to say yes to Caleb in the first place. He's family, Lorraine, and they just need a little time, and I had watched her face, on her last visit, when Caleb introduced her to his neighbor as Lorraine's sister, not as his aunt's guest. Not as family. As a footnote to his household. She had not said anything. Neither had I. When I called her, I told her everything. From the spice cabinet to the mailbox. From the notebook to Martin's card to the photograph on my phone. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I should have said something sooner." I told her she was saying something now. That was enough. I asked her if she would come. Not to confront anyone. Not to witness a scene. Just to be there, the way sisters are, when something important is about to happen. She said she would come Thursday. That evening, I went upstairs and retrieved the notebook from my nightstand drawer. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same spot where I had sat 8 months ago, after Caleb told me he handled all of that now, and understood for the first time the word ownership, and I read through every page from the beginning. 41 entries. Dates going back to month 2. Small things and large things, recorded in the same even hand, because I had learned a long time ago that the small things are never really small. They are the architecture of the larger thing. They are how you show, in the end, what was actually happening while everyone was pretending nothing was. I closed the notebook. I thought about what Martin had told me that morning, the process, the timeline, the language that needed to be precise and the steps that needed to be in the right order. I thought about the 30 days. I thought about what those 30 days would look like inside this house, with the notice served and the arrangement dissolved and Caleb and Priya understanding, finally, that the woman they had been managing was not manageable. I was not afraid of those 30 days. What I felt, sitting on the edge of my bed with the notebook in my hands, was something closer to clarity. The kind that comes when you have been in a fog for so long that you forgot fog was not the natural condition of things. I put the notebook in my cardigan pocket. I went downstairs. I made dinner, my kitchen, my stove, my table, my chair, and I ate alone in the quiet, and for the first time in 8 months, the quiet felt like mine. Thursday morning, Donna arrived early. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table together, and I showed her the notebook, and I showed her the photograph, and I told her what I was going to do. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "When?" I said, "Today, while they're both at work." I had the paint pen in my cardigan pocket. The same pocket where I had carried Martin's business card. I had chosen the color carefully, the same cream white as the original lettering, the shade my late husband had used when he painted the house numbers all those years ago. Donna walked with me to the end of the front path. I opened the mailbox. I uncapped the paint pen. And in my own handwriting, steady and unhurried, I wrote my name back where it had always belonged. Lorraine Beckett. I capped the pen. I closed the mailbox. Donna didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I went back inside, sat at my table, and waited for Caleb to come home. What I had not yet told Donna, what she didn't know, what Caleb and Priya had no way of knowing, was that the notice was already drafted. Martin had helped me with the language the day before, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal pad, going through it line by line until it was exactly right. It was in an envelope on the kitchen counter. Properly dated. Legally sufficient. Every word in the correct order. Caleb would walk through that door in 3 hours. And when he did, I would already be seated at my table, in my chair, with my name on my mailbox and 8 months of careful documentation in a notebook in my pocket. He had been in this house for 8 months and had never once looked at me carefully enough to see what I was. He was about to find out. Caleb came through the door at 4:47 in the afternoon. I heard the key in the lock. I heard him set his bag down in the hallway the way he always did, a soft thud against the baseboard. I heard him stop. I knew the moment he saw it. There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 4 seconds. But I had been in that house for 31 years and I knew every sound it made, and I knew the difference between someone walking through a door and someone standing still in a hallway because something had stopped them. He came into the kitchen. I was already seated at my table. My chair. The one that had been moved to the corner in month 2 and that I had carried back to its place that morning with both hands. Caleb stood in the doorway. He looked at the mailbox through the kitchen window. Then he looked at me. He said, "What is this?" I didn't answer that. I reached across the table and slid the envelope toward him. He didn't pick it up right away. He looked at it the way people look at things they already know are going to cost them something. Then he opened it. I watched him read. I watched the moment the language became clear to him, the legal language, the dates, the 30-day window, the grounds. Martin had been thorough. Every word was in the correct order. There was nothing in that document that could be misread. Caleb looked up. He said, "Lorraine." My name. My actual name. The first time in months he had said it directly to me, not around me, not about me to someone else in another room. I picked up my coffee cup. I said nothing. He said it again, softer this time, and I understood that the softness was not tenderness, it was the sound a person makes when they realize the ground has shifted and they are trying to find their footing. He was recalculating. I could see it. Looking for the version of this conversation where he could still manage the outcome. There wasn't one. I had spent 8 months being managed. I had spent 3 weeks making sure that this moment could not be managed. He set the notice down on the table. He said, "We can talk about this." I said, "There's nothing to talk about. It's all written down, asterisk." He stood there for another moment. Then he went upstairs. I sat at my table and finished my coffee. Priya came home 40 minutes later. I heard them through the ceiling, not the words, just the register of it, the back and forth of 2 people trying to find a way out of something that had already closed. It went on for a while. Then it went quiet. Neither of them came back downstairs that evening. I made dinner. I ate at my table, at my window, in my kitchen. Donna had gone home by then, but she had texted me once, "How did it go?" I wrote back, "Done." She sent back a single word, "Good." They left on day 28. I was in the garden when I heard the car. I didn't go to the window. I had said what needed to be said. The rest was logistics, and logistics didn't require my attention. I heard the front door close. I heard the car start. I heard it pull away down the street. Then there was nothing. I stayed in the garden for a few more minutes. The morning was cool and the light was low and the yard looked the way it always had, the way it had looked when my husband and I planted the border along the fence, the way it had looked every autumn for 31 years. I went inside. I put the kettle on. I sat at my table. An hour later, Donna arrived. She let herself in with the key I had given her the week before, my decision, my key, my door. We drank tea and didn't say much, and that was exactly right. Some things don't need to be talked through. Some things just need to be witnessed. The image I come back to, the one that stays, is not the notice, and it is not the moment Caleb said my name. It is the mailbox. My name on it, in my own handwriting, in the morning light. The cream-white letters against the dark metal. Steady. Unhurried. The same hand that signed the mortgage 31 years ago, the same hand that wrote thank you notes and grocery lists and birthday cards for people who eventually stopped seeing the hand that wrote them. Martin came over the morning after they left. We sat on the porch with coffee and he didn't say much either. He just said, "You did it right." I told him I'd had a good teacher. He shook his head and said, "No. You already knew." You just needed someone to confirm it. I think that's true. I think most of us already know. We know when something is being taken. We know when the language shifts, when our home becomes their place, when our name disappears from our own mailbox one ordinary morning. We know. We just spend a long time hoping we're wrong, because being right means having to do something about it. I was not wrong. And when I finally stopped hoping I found out that I was still exactly the person I had always been, the one who knew how to hold things together, the one who kept the spare room ready, the one who wrote things down in a notebook and waited until the time was right. I had just been applying those skills in the wrong direction for 8 months. I have been asked whether I regret offering them that room. I don't. I regret assuming that the people I loved would treat my kindness as kindness. That's a different thing entirely. And I wonder sometimes, sitting at this table, in this chair, in this house that has always been mine, how many of you are still waiting to make that distinction?